Hello everyone. Today I've got a special tutorial, and this one's been in the works for maybe 10 years. This is my Kirishima pattern tutorial series. And for the first video today, we have our belt buckle. Yeah. There's going to be the belt buckle. We're also going to have the mask, and we're going to have the gears as well. And if I get to making some kind of boot covers, maybe I'll do that as well. And if I do the wig again, maybe I'll do that as well. But it's mainly those three pieces, which I have on my Etsy page as a packaged pattern, or if you want, you can buy them separately as well. But let's jump into it. All right, so this tutorial will be primarily based on the pattern I have on my Etsy store. So feel free to pick that up if you want. And if not, stick around and you can learn some basic foam techniques of my own process. So let's get straight into it. So this pattern design isn't exactly the same as the anime, as I wanted to make it a little bit more realistic, somewhere in between super cartoony and in the real world. So there's some creative liberties I took. And now on to the actual construction. So first thing you have to do is print out the pattern to scale. And then once you do that, you're going to cut all the pieces. There's only two, the base piece and then the R that sticks out. And the fact that there's only two pieces makes this a really easy build for someone trying to learn their foam fundamentals and understand the process of foam building. So that was the base piece, and this is the detail piece. And if you look closely, there are some dotted lines that I will explain later. But for now, make sure you cut that solid line, not that dotted line out. I typically like to cut out my patterns very, very carefully because I want to reduce as many mistakes as possible. So this is actually 10 times faster than I usually cut them. And as you can see, that's a nice and clean pattern with the pattern cut properly on the lines. And for the section in the middle, I'm going to go ahead and use a knife just because I find it easier. You can use a knife or scissors to cut out your patterns. Doesn't really matter. It's up to your preference, really. And don't be discouraged if it takes you a long time or you don't feel very confident using a knife to cut out patterns and things like that. It takes a long time, at least it took me a long time to get used to cutting with knives. And it's not really a skill that comes easily. It's a skill that comes with time. I actually do have a lot of small little knife techniques that I've mastered over time. And if people would like to learn some of those, I don't mind putting those in a video for you guys to learn as well. Okay, and now we're just about finished with our pattern. There's just one more step that I like to do just to make things easier in the long run. So instead of cutting out any like registration marks with a knife or anything, I like to use this little notch maker. And this helps me align the patterns as they stack on top of each other, especially once you've translated them to foam. So I just put a little notch on all of these lines just so I know where the detail pieces line up on top of the base. And this applies to things much more complex to this as well. This is just a simple example of how you can do it with even the simplest of foam assembly. And now that that's all completed, we can see how these two patterns can stack up on each other and be completely aligned. Okay, now on to the actual foam building. So for this pattern, you're going to need either 5 or 6 millimeter foam, or if you're talking in freedom units, it's about 1/4 inch. I like to use these pins rather than weighing it down or holding patterns with my hands, because I just know that if I just hold it with my hand, it will most likely slide around and my pattern transfer won't be as accurate. As for what I actually like to use to transfer patterns, I typically work with black foam, so I like to use these metallic Sharpies or this Milwaukee chalk pen marker thing. And I do like this pen marker much more because I find that the Sharpies, or at least the metallic markers, do run out of ink much faster and are much harder to see under some lighting conditions. But if you are working with lighter colored foam like white or gray, a simple pen works just as fine. I just typically like using black foam. And try to remember, when we are transferring our patterns over, try to make sure you get those registration marks in that transfer as well. And I'm using a black pen right here, and it's not really a good idea because you won't be able to see it as well as the white marker, but I can see it because my eyes are sharp. And I just cut off the excess of that dotted line, and we're going to use the inside of that middle to line it up again and trace where that dotted line would be. This excess line will serve as our guide when we go in with our Dremel and add that extra level of detailing with the bevel. And we will do the same thing with the inside, and we're going to use that outside now to allow us to line up the inside bevel line. That our patterns are all transferred to the foam, I'm going to come in with my knife just to cut out the pieces roughly so that they're easier to manage and cut them out exactly with the knife. So, gentle reminder again, we want to cut on the outer line, not the inner line. That inner line is for our detail with our rotary tool later on. And before we do any cuts, I always like to use some WD-40 to add some grease to my knife and then sharpen it using I forgot what the word is in IKEA, but this is an IKEA knife sharpener that you can get for really cheap, and it's really, really easy to use. So a little spritz of WD-40 and just a couple passes with the knife and the sharpener. I like to do at least 7 just in case. And once your knife is sharpened, I just wipe off that excess lubricant and then you're free to cut. Also, another very important thing, we want to make sure our knife is cutting at a 90-degree angle. Some patterns require it to be at a different angle, but for this specific case scenario, we want it to be straight down right angle. And remember, we're just cutting out the outside of this piece. That inside marking is just for our guide. So once we've sharpened our blade again before the next cut, let's pay attention to this one because we're actually going to cut at a 45-degree angle rather than a 90-degree angle. So we're going to use that extra marking we made earlier, and we're going to cut from the edge to where that marking is. It's a bit complicated, but you'll see after the cuts are already done. You'll get a nice beveled edged, and it gives you a lot more detail than just cutting it straight down. Alternatively, you could also just leave that part on and carve into it with the Dremel, creating that bevel after the fact. But give it a shot, and if you can't get a nice bevel from the get-go, you can still come in with a Dremel or rotary tool afterwards and clean that up. And what I'm doing here is actually a technique that I use to prevent a weird offcut at the beginning. So I use a sacrificial piece of foam just to prevent the knife from jumping that initial start of the cut. And you can see how slow these cuts actually go in real time. I take my sweet time with these just to make sure they're really, really clean. And as you can see, that cut doesn't have any jagged edges. It's nice and smooth. And so we're going to repeat that same angled cut for the rest of the pieces until they're all cut out nice and angled. Okay, so the last piece is this center section, and we want to do the same thing with everything else, but it's a little bit harder because it's in the middle of the foam. So we just saw in a little bit to start our cut, and we're going to try to make it one smooth, long, single cut. And as you can see, it's not the cleanest, but it's completely fine. As long as we come in with our rotary tool after, we can clean that right up. And this is the fit of the detailed piece on top of the base, and that's that. And now onto our dremeling station. I have this nice little place where I keep all the mess contained. And before we even start, as you saw, we want to use our eye protection and our lung protection, I guess. That's what the mask's for. We want to keep those particulates out of our lungs, keep our bodies nice and healthy, because if we're not healthy, we can't craft, we can't cosplay. So health and safety, number one. Okay, and now that we have our pieces in the area, we're going to use a little sanding bit. I'm going to use this large sanding drum just so that I can take off a lot more material than if I use a smaller one or a stone bit. Some things to avoid for beginners or anyone new to a rotary tool in general is that you want to avoid going against the grain. And what I mean by that is that rotary tools spin a certain direction, and you want to have the rotary tool glaze across the piece of material you're working on, right? As opposed to fighting against it and having it dig into the piece more than you anticipate. So make sure that as your rotary tool is spinning, you want to kind of let it follow the direction it wants to go, and that would provide you with the smoothest, cleanest results. This next step is a really small one, but I always like to make sure I brush any extra dust off of my pieces, especially after I've used any kind of sanding tool on them. Because when we go on to our gluing process, we want to make sure that pieces stick together and there's no random dust preventing that from happening. All right, now that our pieces are finally all shaped up and free of dust, we can finally glue them together. And just as a quick rule, it should always be this way, because if you don't shape the pieces before you glue them together, the other pieces connecting to itself will prevent you from carving in these smaller details like that inside of the R. It would be kind of impossible to get nice and clean this exact same way with the Dremel. And so what I'm doing right here is I'm just repinning the piece to the base, just so that I can trace the outline one more time, because it could have changed from the pattern we traced initially, and I would rather trace it and have it be exact than trust my old human flaws. And so now that we've traced it down, we know exactly where we want the contact adhesive to go. So I'm using barge for this because I find that it is the strongest glue and most flexible glue as well. And so I'm using these scraps as kind of pseudo brushes just because I find it's easier to use foam scraps than a brush more often than not. And I'm very carefully applying the barge just inside the outlines that we just traced for the R. It's okay if you go a little bit out, but you would either see the glue on the other side of the piece once you're painting it and everything, or you could clean it up using something like Goo Off or some other type of solvent. And now that our pieces are completely covered with glue, we want to close up our glue and let these just air dry for a bit. And what I'm doing here periodically is just checking with the piece of paper, doing what is called a paper test to see if the glue is dried enough and is not tacky. Just enough to see that it's dry, but not wet enough that it won't stick to itself. I'm also using a piece of paper here now to prevent pieces that I don't want from touching while I connect other parts of the piece. And after I've pressed it all together and hard, I'm just using a piece of tape to take away that excess glue that's still there, still tacky. And now that the piece is all complete, we'll take a look for any imperfections or anything. And as you can see, it's nice and smooth, nice and flat. And as I realized just now, I didn't heat seal it yet. I would typically heat seal the foam before I do any construction, just to reduce any shrinkage, but since this piece is nice and small, it doesn't really matter. And so, taking a look at those edges and everything, make sure everything is nice and smooth, just in case we need to come back in with a Dremel, or if we need to come in and glue any edges back onto the right spots. Okay, and now on to finally heat sealing at the end. It's okay to do at the end, but I prefer doing it as I go along just to prevent any random shrinkage. And as you saw just there, you want to make sure that the foam is actually nice and shiny. That's how you know you're properly heat sealing. But you also want to be careful if you're heat sealing after you've assembled things, because heat does release contact cement. So if you do see it releasing, you can just press it together nice and hard, even while it's still releasing. And that's our final piece. Thank you all for watching this video all the way to the end. This video is the first of a series I've been doing for the patterns I've made for my Kirishima cosplay a while ago. And if you want to see more of that, be sure to subscribe and keep an eye out for when those come out.